Did you know on Bespin Cloud City you can actually kill enemies by trapping them in the carbon freezing chamber in EA's Battlefront 1? As seen in episode 5, if you go up to this control panel and hold the interact button, even though it doesn't show an icon, it will cause the platform to lower, instantly killing anyone inside. This, and another freezing chamber that isn't powered up, are only found on the smaller map of the Bespin DLC. Sadly, it was never brought over to the sequel, but both original Battlefront games do include this room in their Cloud City maps. And if you play on the Galactic Civil Era, the freezing chamber is actually turned on, occasionally lifting frozen Han Solo, which is pretty cool. Plus, although the platform is already lowered, falling inside is an instant kill, meaning it can take out heroes if you manage to push them inside. But you probably noticed all this orange gas spewing around the chamber. Well, carbon freezing would normally be used on materials like gases to transport them in a more stable condition. Bespin, being a gas planet with the iconic orange atmosphere, is rich with Tibanna Gas, which was most commonly used for blaster bolt ammunition. Stations like these, seen in the Starfighter Assault map, would be used to mine the materials in the atmosphere. And although it's a bit hard to recognize in the reboot since we never really saw them up close in the films, this is actually where the platform's map from the original Battlefront is based on, which is pretty cool. Not the most accurate representation of these mining platforms, but still an iconic map. Plus, they were showcased in the Battlefront 2 campaign mission where you actually fight on one briefly in the beginning of the mission. If only they turned this into a map for the game, but hopefully in Battlefront 3. You might be thinking, how can there be blue skies if Bespin is a gas planet? That's because Cloud City is located in the Life Zone, a layer of the atmosphere that's rich in oxygen, which is why a break through the clouds can sometimes show a nice blue, just like on Earth. Nearly every map shows this in some area of the sky, but Bionip Laboratories takes place during a clear day, which gives this city a whole new feel. And according to the wiki, Bionip Laboratories first appeared in a Legends comic as a Cybertronic and weapons R&D lab for the Empire. Honestly, a shame this map was only available in 3 game modes, since it's easily one of the most visually stunning renditions of Bespin in the game. In fact, Battlefront 2's campaign mission had a nighttime Bespin map that also looked really nice, but sadly was exclusive to the story mode. Although we never saw this in the films, it still would have been nice as a full map. On that note, the Battlefront reboot has so much references to The Empire Strikes Back scattered around each of the 4 maps. Some of the coolest being the smaller details like going through these light tunnels, having the Slave 1 parts on the platforms, or just seeing background shots being rendered in so much detail, which really helps the map feel like a real place. And although many of these references were also in the originals maps, including the place where Luke lost his hand, it just can't accurately capture the scale and size of the city. Especially when you go out of bounds, which isn't that far from the main command posts, it's easy to break the immersion, compared to the dense skyline of the new Battlefront, which was the first time we ever saw Bespin with modern graphics. In fact, since the map needed to look big enough to match the hyper-realistic feel of the game, the devs weren't sure if the current gen hardware could handle it at the time, becoming a big development problem. This was the same reason why maps like Geonosis and Felucia were chosen over Coruscant. According to a DICE developer on Reddit, no one from the team wanted to develop Coruscant from how taxing on the hardware it would be to try making it work with as much detail as Bespin. The original Battlefront 2 probably chose to use the Jedi Temple for this reason, and looking off in the distance, it's not hard to imagine a city map wouldn't have worked great either, especially since most other iterations of the street levels of Coruscant, like in the cancelled Battlefront 3 or Jedi Survivors, are just small floating platforms that always have to use loading techniques to hide the view of the massive city. That's not to say the Coruscant maps have no cool details. Nearly every command post in the original Battlefront 2 has some sort of movie reference. Some are harder to notice than others, like the room where Obi-Wan saw the security footage, though generally they're all pretty iconic. But you probably didn't notice that the Jedi Archives room has the sculptures of the different Jedi Masters, but I don't think any of these are actual Jedi. This one might even be a Gungan with no ears and his hair tied back. Plus, the Jedi Library is actually a digital reconstruction of the Long Room of Trinity College in Ireland, which is pretty cool. Also, the Battlefront 3 map of Coruscant, which was eventually used in Elite Squadrons for the PSP, but with a lot less detail, has been faithfully reconstructed in the Legacy mod for Battlefront 2. And although the map is mostly just a flat platform, it does include the diner as a command post, as well as these electric things from Episode 2. The map was also intended to have seamless ground-to-space combat, so you can fly around the buildings and fight above the atmosphere, which is pretty cool, but no capital ships as of yet. Speaking of which, the Coruscant Space Battle campaign mission includes 2 extra capital ships on the field, making it one of the biggest in the game. Sadly, this is exclusive to the story mode, but you might have noticed that the extra capital ship hangars are closed. That's because there was originally 5 capital ships on the field that were spawnable in the demo version. Although this made the space battles way cooler, it was eventually taken out, probably because of hardware limitations of the current gen consoles. A shame the classic collections didn't revive this either. In fact, the pre-released version of the Jedi Temple looked a bit different as well. Not only was the map at sunset, but the security and comms room were missing, and replaced with a more generic room instead, which I'm so glad it was updated in the final version. Plus, the veranda was also less detailed, and places around the map weren't destroyed from Order 66. On that note, the generic Jedi you verse in Operation Nightfall have 4 different variations, and hidden in the game's code is this unused Sith model that, thanks to viewer MD Toaster, is actually one of Count Dooku's dark acolytes named Trenox from an old Game Boy game, leading many in the community to think the devs were planning on creating a Jedi vs Sith game mode on Coruscant, especially since another dark acolyte, Asajj Ventress, was introduced as DLC for the game. Battlefront 2's Order 66 mission is still a fan favorite since it's one of the only games that let you play through the purge of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, and playing as this hooded appearance of Anakin as a kid was one of the coolest things in the game, as it's the only time a hero skin changes other than for Pilot Luke. Looking back now though, some things definitely didn't make sense, like how the main infantry are slightly modified Naboo guards, there's droid starfighters in the sky for some reason, and the 501st enters the temple from the veranda via an LAAT gunship instead of marching in through the stairs like in the films. But if a new Battlefront game readapts this mission and map with modern graphics, it'll literally become the most sold Star Wars game ever. So far, the only game with a detailed Coruscant map is LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga, which includes a lot of the areas from the Battlefront games I just mentioned earlier, albeit in a smaller fashion, as well as the political districts with Padme and Palpatine's own offices. Plus, the Uskru Street District looks really nice and detailed, having a few references to the films as well. Bringing it back to Cloud City, the DLC introduced both Lando and Dengar as heroes. A lot of people, including myself, didn't really know much about Dengar outside this one episode 5 scene. Well, other than the fact that he's a bounty hunter who prefers using more explosive techniques. In Legends, he became part cyborg from a racing accident caused by Han Solo, which scarred his face. While in canon, he got scarred from a thermal detonator by Chewbacca. Either way, he still uses rusted sand trooper armor, and although he makes an appearance in Return of the Jedi, Dengar does live past the sandbarge incident in both stories. The Bespin DLCs also introduced the Cloud Car exclusive to the maps, being the only ship in the game to have dark blue blaster bolts, and unlike in the movies where it's always seen as orange, the Battlefront reboots changed the color of the Cloud Car to match the faction so it's more easily identifiable. This wasn't the case in the original games, but the Cloud Car would only spawn on captured enemy platforms, making them a more neutral vehicle. The original Bespin maps are regarded as some of the best in the game, both having long corridors that would create some of the funnest gameplay moments, including flying a Republic Jedi starfighter through them if you had the guts, or holding down the rest of the team with a Jedi. Both maps have some of the best places for sniping with all its open areas, and since platforms was one of the easiest maps to blast Jedi and infantry over the edge, having a jetpack makes getting around so much quicker and safer. Plus, not sure why, but blasting heroes off the edge is so satisfying. But there's something strange about these maps. Playing with no music reveals eerie sounds in the background. Plus, there's random Bacta and Gonk droids scattered around parts of the map that no one would really use. And glitching through the roof of the carbon freezing chamber reveals even more droids placed inside the floor and walls, which is pretty interesting. Big shout out to User Prognosis for letting me know where these glitched droids were, since I definitely wouldn't have found these without him. There's also a few random empty hallways only accessible with a jetpack, one of which is out of bounds. It all makes this map feel like the back rooms of Star Wars. The reboot's best Bespin map also had a few glitches in each of the different maps as seen on Vader Gamer's channel, most of which are clipping through the walls. But a video by the user Lucapook shows that you can use cloud cars to pick up infantry and drop them off on the top of the really tall buildings around the map, which is pretty cool. Would have been really awesome to do this in a live match back in the day. Coruscant also has some interesting glitches, a lot of which are flying through places that weren't coated with a collision barrier. Some of my favorite include hiding in the library shelves with an engineer after repairing them, using the jet trooper to fly on top of the different high platforms around the map, including the ones in the main hall, and flying through this dead zone in the library, which gives you access to most of the inside of the map. There's even a turret pad here, and you can move through the back of the library to other areas, but it's pretty easy to fall down, so watch out. As a cool side note, there's a hidden tile on the roof of the main hall that says Jedi in Urabesh. Plus, shout out to the TheDiamondAlpha's video for showing that using a turret you can clip past this Jedi statue to go under the war room stairs. But this only works on the console versions. Speaking of which, Bespin has a few console version differences, starting off once again with an extra gonk droid glitched in the walls on the top right side of the map. Victory screens also change depending on the version, and although nothing really changes between the Coruscant versions that I noticed, it was a cut map from the PSP port of the game, even though it's present in the files, which works perfectly fine when unlocked with mods. In the Bespin campaign mission of Battlefront 2, you fly through a herd of these massive jellyfish things called Beldons, which feed off the natural gas in the atmosphere, digest it, and release it back in the form of Tibanna Gas, which is the valuable resource of Bespin mentioned earlier. Meaning Beldons are really important for the Empire's weapon research, so they weren't allowed to be hunted on the planet. In fact, this is just one of the many creatures the Empire uses for the secret research scattered around the Battlefront maps. Find out more here.